Thank you for coming to the Writing Center YouTube channel. Today we are going to talk about run-on sentences and how to recognize and remove them from your writing. First, we have an example of a run-on sentence just to get us started. It reads, Charlotte Perkins Gilman shared her painful story to save others from experiencing the same sort of diagnosis and treatment. Gilman wanted people to see how horrible the rest cure was and how much it affected the women, particularly with regard to those who could afford the treatment and rest for a long period of time, only because they were wealthier and didn't have to work. You'll notice that this sentence has at least two other sentences inside of it, and with a little bit of editing could actually be more. So the first step to address a long sentence like this is to read your writing out loud to see where you have sentences that keep going. Sometimes these sentences will be indicated by how hard it is for you to take a breath as you read them aloud. Whew. Take a deep breath before beginning, and then, for example, Charlotte Perkins Gilman shared her painful story to save others from experiencing the same sort of diagnosis and treatment. Gilman wanted people to see how horrible the rest cure was and how much it affected the women, particularly with regard to those who could afford the treatment and rest for a long period of time only because they were wealthier and didn't have to work. Whew, that's quite a lot of reading and quite a lot of breath that goes into that reading. Yes, I'm overemphasizing a little bit, but I want you to see how difficult it is for your instructors when they have to read a sentence like that. I also want you to see how difficult it is for you yourself when you write a sentence like that. So the next step has to become one in which you learn what makes a complete sentence or independent clause. A complete sentence must always have a clear verb, subject, and should not begin with a transitional term such as while, however, or furthermore. It must do all this without indicating its dependence on another clause. For example, Charlotte Perkins Gilman shared her painful story to save others from experiencing the same sort of diagnosis and treatment. It is a complete sentence because it has a clear subject, a clear verb, and does not indicate independence on another clause. Pardon me, does not indicate dependence on another clause. However, the second example is an incomplete sentence because it uses while to indicate dependence on another clause. While Charlotte Perkins Gilman shared her painful story, what happened next? There's a pause there with no information. So instead, to make it a complete sentence, we have to look at the third example. While Charlotte Perkins Gilman shared her painful story, she did so on her own terms. The while is now connected to the second clause, she did so on her own terms, making it an independent clause when put all together. Once you've learned and determined what independent clauses you have, you next need to note that anytime you have more than one of those, they should be divided by either a semicolon or a period. Semicolons are used to divide two closely related but independent clauses. For example, Charlotte Perkins Gilman is an author. She wrote her first short story in 1891. Both of these facts are closely related as they both have to do with Gilman as a subject. Therefore, they can be separated by a semicolon. Periods, on the other hand, are a better option if your ideas are more distinct from one another. For example, Charlotte Perkins Gilman is an author. One of the stories Gilman wrote claimed international attention. We've moved from her as a subject to her story as a subject, so they should be separated by a period. For step 4, you need to count your conjunctions. Conjunctions are words or phrases that are used to separate ideas and sentences, sometimes even, but that show connection between the ideas. Examples of conjunctions include and, but, if, and or. A good rule of thumb is that if you have more than one conjunction in a sentence, it might be getting pretty lengthy, particularly with regard to and. If you have two or more and present in a sentence, you need to divide it up into more than one sentence, as you are building one idea off of the next and probably piling a lot of information on your readers all at once. The final step, step 5, is that when you have multiple subjects, the individual doing the action, in a sentence, each should get their own verb, the action, and their own sentence, making them into independent clauses. Taking all of this advice in mind, let's look back at our example again and see how we've divided it up. This example is taken from the previous sentence, and by dividing it up nearly every time we have a clear subject and verb, we create a few clear sentences instead of one long jumbled one. For example, Charlotte Perkins Gilman shared her painful story to save others from experiencing the same sort of diagnosis and treatment. Gilman wanted people to see how horrible the rest cure was and how much it affected the women. The treatment targeted those who could afford it and rest for a long period of time, only because they were wealthier and didn't have to work. Thanks for coming to our little lecture on how to stop run-on sentences in your writing, first recognizing them and what leads to them. And it can be really helpful. We have other examples like this, including this example in worksheet form, available as on the student and faculty resources part of our IWU homepage. Thanks so much for stopping by.